Hi everyone, my name is Brendan and I'm the guy who shot, edited and released Paul Bédard's Quinte à l'Inconnu, and I'm the one who's currently filming right now, and I'll of course edit this afterwards. But I'm here today for all the Anglophones who've been asking Paul to translate the original videos into an English version. Now, me and Paul went back and forth on the best way of doing this. Originally, we had the idea to subtitle the original 45-minute videos, but then we had the discussion on that not necessarily being fair to Anglophones. And what I mean by that is having all that work put into the original videos and having everyone else read through it just didn't seem fair. I'd also like to add that the events that I'm about to discuss to you today, I did not witness whatsoever. I wasn't even born at the time. Neither was I a part of the investigation that took place for the witness testimony. I have no part to play in this whatsoever. The only reason I'm here is to give you an English version of the story. There's been a lot of work put into this investigation. Paul has been through a lot, and I'm only here to give his version of the testimony in English. And with all that being said, sit back, relax, and enjoy. In the afternoon of October 27, 1989, three separate groups of multiple individuals laid witness to an event that would turn their reality on their heads. Present with them were provincial and federal officials as well as mine workers. The first group of witnesses were simply out for a drive, and it should be mentioned that the entire event took place during small game hunting season, meaning that there was a lot more traffic in the area than usual. Those people were already out driving along the small road where the surreal experience was about to take place. In the second group, an employee of the Heath Steel Mine where the event took place saw what could only be described as a spaceship hovering over the area just beyond. The employee immediately rushed into his vehicle and drove towards the hovering object. The third and final group of witnesses were also in their vehicle on Route 430 near the mine. They hailed from Miramichi when they saw the spacecraft in the distance. They rushed onto the small access road where the event was taking place. The first group at this time had suddenly noticed the unimaginable overhead, the strange silhouette of an unidentified flying object. Quietly, as their senses adapted, they realized that they were living out the inexplicable. Anxiety set in the face of an extraterrestrial spaceship that was about to land right in front of them. They panicked and they were overcome by various emotions, including their insatiable curiosity. The group observed this unknown spaceship as it came in for landing. They described the craft as being circular, topped with a frosted, translucent dome. Now, you have to understand that for these people, the world had shifted. However, they had not seen the last of this event. The spaceship then deployed beams of black light and stopped about 5 meters from the ground. This all happened in complete silence. They could no longer hear the birds singing nor the rustling of the trees. Everything seemed to stand still. At that moment, they were able to observe the spacecraft in detail. The craft was typical in shape, resembling the sort of flying saucer you'd see a child draw. Measuring about 5 meters in diameter, before them was the most fascinating and yet unforgettably terrifying object. It was perfectly symmetrical with a slight pinkish tint and small red lights. On the top, the dome, as previously discussed, was frosted, so they could not clearly see inside. However, that would soon change. The next few minutes of this extraordinary encounter would only serve to heighten the experience. Suddenly, a beam of bluish-white light resembling a fine mist appeared below the craft. Now, you have to remember that all of this is happening in broad daylight. However, despite that, the beam was clearly visible. It's about at this time that the second and third group of witnesses appeared on the scene in their respective vehicles. And suddenly, the impossible was happening. All groups of witnesses claimed to have observed extraterrestrial biological entities appear underneath the craft within the beam of mist. The entities, or aliens, then began to slowly walk around, moving all over the area. They were described as wearing black uniforms with oversized heads, large black almond-shaped eyes, and long necks that seemed relatively fragile given the size of their heads. These beings were about 5 feet tall, and their skin seemed to be a pale beige. Now, according to various investigations in the ufological world, these beings are known as little grays, and define this specific encounter under the category of close encounter of the third kind. The witnesses were then greeted by a second, much larger spaceship that was already on the ground near the first. The second ship is described to be about 20 meters in diameter, its size comparable to a house. Its color was more of a dull gray, with portholes encircling what seemed to be the main engine. Now, what made this an exceptional spacecraft is that it had metal arms on the top. According to some of the information obtained, it would appear that these arms could have been used to place the smaller spaceship on top, therefore possibly a dock for the first craft in order to travel as a single unit. At this point, about 10 little grays were walking around. They walked onto the path among the vegetation, bending over to pick up branches in order to observe them, resting for a moment and then continuing to wander around. According to the observers, the extraterrestrials seemed to levitate and even teleport in order to get to the front steps of an on-site trailer belonging to a forestry contractor. However, it must be noted that the witnesses had trouble understanding what exactly they were seeing. Two other entities, a bit different than the others, of the same size but with shorter and thicker necks, who reportedly looked more aggressive, stood on each side of the witness vehicles like guards. These entities were close to the vehicles but never actually touched them. They may have sensed that the witnesses inside posed no significant threat. In certain encounters of the third kind, it's been suggested that these beings may possess telepathic abilities. Nonetheless, none of the observers reported any communication whatsoever, nor did they perceive any messages. There was also a third type of being witnessed on the scene. These beings were larger, with approximately the same build as human beings. They were dressed in what seemed to be white robes. These beings were unmistakably humanoid. They even had faces and hair. About 2 or 3 of them were deployed on the ground, while another could be seen standing in the mouth of the larger spaceship, just visible through an open door. Some of these humanoids were carrying unidentifiable instruments in their hands. Movement was also observed inside the spacecraft, visible through its portholes. No doubt there were additional entities moving inside the ship. It's important to mention that at no time did any of the witnesses feel at risk or perceive any signs of violence against them. You could say that everything went smoothly and peacefully, although among the observers, emotions and tensions were running at an all-time high. The witnesses say they felt as if they were in a bubble. The normal ambient noise of the forest was no longer perceivable. It was only upon the departure of both ships that everything went back to normal, and the sound of the birds and other forest noises could once again be heard. The event as a whole was described to be around 45 minutes. As you can imagine, the authorities did not take long to respond. The reliability of the observers and the evidence captured on film triggered quite a commotion. However, it did not take long for the area to be secured, with sentries being posted on the small access road. Several hunters in the area at the time reported seeing Canadian Armed Forces guards. Some of the members of the public approached these sentries to ask them questions. The official response is that it was all a training exercise and there had been an industrial spill. At the time, this response may have sounded credible, and it did work to a certain degree. After government verification, however, it was concluded that no permits were issued, either governmental or mining, and there were no reports of spills in the area. In conclusion, the story you've just heard was told through witness testimony obtained by Paul Bédard during his search for answers. Whether you believe in such testimonies remains to you. Thank you for listening.
He